Hey, Jamie. Let me guess. You doing well, too?
Well, yes, good morning again.
Good morning to you. It is
Yeah,
afternoon over where I am. So,
but coffee's still to be had. So
yes, it's cold. It's cold where I am, so I could drink coffee all the time. 80.
literally,
Wow, jeez.
yeah.
It
It's
is, I think, 29 over here.
wow. Yeah, that totally. I mean, we are the extremes on the podcast. So
Yeah, you sure are. 1 hour
I mean,
time
I mean,
difference and
I mean, we could be 29 tomorrow. I mean, who knows? It is Texas after all. But
yeah. When was the because I teach in HVAC and energy systems class, I have brought up the Texas ice storm from last year. Without no, it was this
knock
year
on
because it was
knock on wood. Yeah, it
that
was
was
this year,
January, right?
end of January, beginning of
Yeah,
February. Yeah,
yeah. Which yeah, I
February, I
use
believe.
that as an example of infrastructure and so on. I
Oh
hope
yeah.
that does not occur again.
Well, yeah. I hope so too.
Although with climate change, right? The
W-
some of the things are
Well,
to think about are that it's not going to be fluke deals anymore, right?
well, yeah, that's right. I think that's the whole thing is that the premise of something like that is predicated on the fact that climate change is increasing the need to address energy needs and climate situations that we weren't necessarily dealing with at the level and extent that we were previously. So, of course, you have to do something. And part of that resilience is in being prepped
Mm-hmm.
and preparing, like you were just talking about, sounds like with your students, infrastructure. So in a year's time, there's been a lot of reporting in the last month and a half or so, where people in the news media are sort of circling back. Reporters are looking at stories because the weather's changing. It's the fall. It's going into the winter here, and people are saying, okay, is the electrical grid, because the real issue was sort of power and the electrical
Mm-hmm.
grid and where we get
Maintenance,
power.
right?
Yeah, where we get power, what that distribution looks like, what sources are there, how did we tap into reserves, all those things, and maintenance. And have things progressed? Have they done things? Have they really? And the verdict appears to be no. No one has really kind of redoubled efforts or really made any significant
Wow.
alterations or changes. So it's going to be
Wow.
sort of a, like, yeah, let's let it ride.
Year two. Wow. That's I mean, because there's millions or billions of dollars of funds needed to make those maintenance repairs and upgrades and tune-ups. Because I think part of the issue was some monies that were not spent, and so high power line infrastructure kind of weakened, or were in weakened condition or susceptible to the ice storm issue. So,
Well, I
well,
mean, and that
good.
was the thing is, I think it's from the circling back to how we got into this about the climate, is that, yeah, so climate change has exacerbated the extent of those types of storms and weather events. And so that was the thing, was no one expected that the whole state to be hit, because Texas is a big state, and no one expected to be that extent of the grid, that extent of the state to be
Yeah,
hit all at the
yeah,
same time with a very, very similar need. And that was the part that, from the infrastructure side, they're like, we never accounted for this. We
right,
never thought that this day would happen.
right,
And it's like, well, what's your worst case scenario? Oh, well, this wasn't it. We hadn't planned for the worst case scenario. So it's like, okay, well, now you've seen it. What's what do you do in to plan for the next worst case scenario? And now
right.
that we've lived through it, and that's the scary part, is that people who are much smarter than us probably, and who analyze this stuff, have sort of come back that the verdict is we're not prepared,
Yeah,
um, which is scary.
yeah, yeah. Well, I hope we don't get a weather event that is well equal to, let's just say it probably will be some kind of weather event, but hopefully it won't be equal to the severity of last this year.
Yeah, for
this
sure.
the last winter, I should say. Anyway, so we tend to we'll go wade into some of these hot button tense issues when we set up our goals for podcasts. We try and pick out sketches to keep it light and airy, and then
Light and airy,
Kurt's the doom and gloom. Kurt over here wants to like drag us into the abyss.
Well, I was talking to my students about HVAC and climate change.
Yeah, right. Well, I got to find a way to make that sound exciting. So Monday, so tomorrow, I gave away the day of the week tomorrow is the last lecture for the semester. And then
do you bring cupcakes for that?
I don't think I get paid enough to bring cupcakes in. Actually, so I teach a studio as well, and they're sophomores, second year students, and one of them divulged that her birthday is tomorrow. So
cupcakes.
I might do something. Being their sophomores, they're so close to high school. Another doom and gloomy kind of point to make, but it has come up in conversation as we approach the end of the semesters. So this second year cohort, these students were ones that if they did a graduation, they did a high school drive-through graduation, right? Because of COVID. So they really have missed a lot of sort of social milestones, touchstones in their lives. So that makes me want to bring cupcakes in just because everyone could use a cupcake.
Everyone could use a cupcake. Absolutely.
They might also walk away with a Coffee Sketch podcast pin.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I still have some of those.
Could just like set it in the icing on the cupcake.
After I spray it down with some sanitizer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a sketch of recently that included a cupcake. I don't know if you caught that or not.
Oh, I don't know. Are we going to be talking about? We're not going to be talking about.
We're not talking about that one today. No. But I don't know if you caught that one, because I'm not a big sweets person, but I have to say that a really good cupcake goes a long way.
Yeah, good one. Definitely. Yeah, bad cupcake. Not much to write about.
Yeah.
Kind of avoid those. Sorry. What were you gonna say?
Nothing. I didn't know where to go after like bad cupcake.
That's nothing to write about. Like seriously.
No.
Yeah. Good ones.
Or do sketches about, for sure.
Well, we'll have to cover that on a future. We'll have to circle back. Future episode, we'll find that cupcake sketch.
So for those of you with your Coffee Sketch podcast bingo card, that's when you fill in the circle back. You can mark that on your bingo card right now.
Circle back.
Kurt says circle back.
And
Click.
Jamie says mark the tape is another one. We should make a bingo card. That would be kind of fun.
I feel like a holiday bingo card. We can do it as a game, and people can like watch and follow along, and it could be some in merch. We need merch like that.
We do need some. Well, we are working on the coffee beans.
Mm-hmm. This is true.
So we need additional swag. Merch.
All this stuff.
Wait, is it swag when it's free and merch when it costs money?
I think so. Is that how it works? Like clearly we're the business like elite here, right?
We're trying to monetize the podcast with our best guesses, right?
Yeah.
Totally. Too much swag, not enough merch, right?
Yeah. So what's in your cup?
So I was trying to allude to, and shout out to Joel, right? Always a friend. I'm drinking out of the mug that he sent us. That is a local roaster of his. So, but today I got, speaking of sweets, I got gifted, since we are near the end of the year, I got a holiday basket from a colleague that included some Godiva hot chocolate, dark chocolate, hot chocolate Godiva. So I decided on a day like today to surprise Jamie with a non-coffee beverage.
That flows into the whole cupcake discussion. So that I totally approve. especially if you say it's 29 degrees outside. That's crazy.
It is definitely hot cocoa day.
It is 80 degrees in Austin, Texas. So,
but for Texas, that's hot cocoa day as well, right?
yeah, probably, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like, why
Well, we
worry
know
about
it's
it?
cupcake day,
It definitely,
cupcake weather.
Yeah.
So what about you?
I brought my props today. So
What is that there?
So
Tweedies?
yeah, so the font should almost look familiar to you, like as a new Twin Peaks connoisseur of the television series.
Oh, yes.
So yes, this is the actual coffee from the cafe. You can order it online and have it delivered. So I got gifted
What?
this. Yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy? I didn't know this was a thing, but I found out it was a thing when this arrived as a present from somebody.
Look at
So,
it's got the Twin Peaks on the top there.
oh yeah. I mean, and it comes with
Cherry pie.
swag. It does come with some swag. I got the right term. So like there was like a whole bar diner.
You didn't pay for the extra stuff.
Well, I mean, it was all a gift anyway. So I mean, but yeah, and it says a damn fine cup of coffee, home of Twin Peaks cherry pie.
Wait, is that actually a restaurant?
Yes, yeah, it's a real place.
So the name of the place in the show is a real place.
Is a real place.
It's probably a stage.
No, it's a real building. It's a real cafe that they
used for a location.
They used as a real location. Yeah,
I can't believe it.
Yeah, so you can actually go. So you can actually go and have coffee,
sit in the booth there,
and cherry pie. Yes, you can do the whole thing, and maybe even a donut.
I would be afraid that now I forget his name, but he would be out of jail and he'd be walking through the what's his name?
Leo?
No, not Leo. The husband of the coffee shop owner. God, I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
Is it Ray?
Yeah.
Ray. Am I right? Ray?
Yes. Yeah. So I thought you were talking about Leo, because I knew that like early on.
It was Leo.
It was fun watching with you, because you're like, Leo he just seems kind of like a punk.
Still not super. Although I've gotten deep enough into it to where, well, I mean, it's no spoiler alert if we talk about Leo's sort of zombie paralysis state, is it? I don't know.
No.
At this point, 30 years later,
I think you're not really doing any spoilers now.
That part gets a little scary.
It gets a little strange, yeah.
But no, I think the reason I'm more afraid of the ex-husband is the fact that I haven't seen that part play out as to his intentions being back. I gotta get back and finish that. And I honestly want to. Anyway, this is what you got me down a Twin Peaks rabbit hole. But that's a really nice.
I mean, that was a really nice. So that was Jason.
There.
Jason.
I figured it would have been a Jason gift. Which good segue to Jason is for fun, as I went back and I edited the video portion of our recording with Jason, since that was like the first time we had, well, I guess this technical second time, but our second guest. So, but that was, episode 50, sort of a milestone for us. We went back, we had a conversation with Jason, talked about the Twin Peaks anniversary. So I edited that and put it on our YouTube channel, which is new for the podcast. You know, so anything that we have visual or video side of this thing, well, I'm going to try and get loaded onto the YouTube, so that the YouTube channel, so that people can also see any of the sketches or engage visually.
Fantastic.
With our stuff. So it's kind of fun to re-edit that. And I did a little bit different edit. I don't know. I cut it down a tiny bit compared to the audio. And
no, that's fun.
Nice to revisit.
Now that's like it's like extra bonus gifts for me. It's like I get the coffee, which is actually quite good, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
It better be a damn fine cup.
Exactly. I was like, Gosh, live up to expectations here.
Does it automatically, does the instructions tell you to make it as dark as midnight on a
they need to add instructions on the back.
that would be it's almost like you probably have to do 2 scoops for every cup.
Right. Yeah. Just like add extra. Well, no, that's actually that's a nice surprise. Well, great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And actually the fun part with YouTube is you have to upload a thumbnail, right? So that you have some kind of, and I have been for the video episodes that we've been doing lately. So 80, 89, 88, going back about 5 or 6 episodes. And now we have the Twin Peaks episode. I've got a logo, or not the logo of the podcast, and then our faces and Instagram.
I know I saw that. I was like, that looks pretty slick. I mean,
but for the Twin Peaks one, there's a Easter egg as I swapped out the imagery.
Ooh.
So the thumbnail is different. So this gonna be a fun one.
Okay, cool.
I hope you like it. It's a little kooky. It's a little Twin Peaksy.
Okay. Is it the left arm? Is it the left arm? No.
No.
Okay.
No. But some other referential imagery. I'll leave it there.
Okay.
So that you can circle every time Kurt says circle back.
Yes.
If somebody gets a bingo.
Or cheers.
Cheer. So that's fun. Yeah, that's a fun little. It was fun to go back and do that and kind of listen to his take on things. It's a little embarrassing for me though, because I still had only seen like 1 episode, and I'm sitting there like, oh, okay, that sounds. Which I'm trying to like. I was like, chop.
I know so much more now. Like,
yeah, it's still fun to do though. It's still fun. We should probably do another. Maybe.
Yeah, we've talked about watching the movie, the 3 of us, and maybe we can work the tech into that. That would be sort of maybe a special bonus. We talk about our outtakes. That would be sort of the special bonus. So that'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be fun. So, but on today, we were going to talk about a couple other things, which are I have not yet figured out if we have a good segue to those sketches, but.
I have one, but I'm not sure. It might be. We're just gonna, because we went down the Twin Peaks sort of spooky little rabbit hole. Let's go with the Dallas sketch first, and because I think in the news it's sort of almost absurdist a little bit. I think at this point, but yeah, you had the right one. Yeah. So there's a lot of like, if you occasionally will look at news on Twitter, or it was in the news cycle just for a very, very brief amount of time. But November 22nd, 1963, JFK was assassinated in Dallas, which was an incredibly momentous, event, and incredibly sad, and still is very sad to think of that. But in the news cycle, there's some weirdness where people think he's coming back from the dead. And I'm not going to go any further in discussion of that, other than that's completely absurd. But I think what the segue for me is like, let's not go Twin Peaks and let's sort of stick to the sketch, because I think I did this sketch on the anniversary, and then you thought it was really, really interesting, and then we got to talking about the definition of a cenotaph. And so yeah, this is the sketch that I did a couple weeks ago on November 22nd.
Were you
2021?
Were you there? Because you were in.
No.
I
wasn't. Yeah, I had been up there, but I wasn't there on this particular day. But it's a space I've been a bunch, and so found an image that I had of it, and did a quick sketch from it, and created a little bit of a composition kind of idea, which I think ends up really way more successful than I thought it was going to be. I thought it might be the verticality of the lines in the background, because the empty tomb that Philip Johnson designed for the site has sort of vertical ribbing on the exterior, and that's really it's very, very stripped down. There's no ornament, hardly any ornament at all to the surface of the material, and it sort of struck me that the spacing of that, and then the slot where you sort of enter the space with that familiar linear background that I've been using for skies
Mhm.
would really kind of allow that space to get generated in a really flat image and sort of a dead
Mhm.
on perspective too.
Mhm.
So I think it turned out a lot better than I thought. So, but I'm curious what your reaction to it. And then I know that we've, talked a little bit more about sort of the architect.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, the sky, the nice sort of what we call as architects parallel lines, since there's a little squiggle in there, but for an architect, that's a parallel line in a sketch form. But it creates a nice texture and backdrop to the very, I mean, it's a very austere and quiet, I guess, design when looking at the actual from a Google map or Street View or other photographs of from his his own designs and models of the building to the actual construction of it. I mean, it's a very symmetrical and sort of uh static building, meant to be kind of relatively quiet and contemplative, as we talked about. And the construction of it too, with well, before I go into the detail in the building, you talk about the sketch. And so the way you've rendered the building, the cenotaph, the memorial space against the backdrop of the sky and sort of one point perspective, it stands out as a very, I mean, it's got a nice sort of presence to it, I guess. For one points, one points can look relatively flat, almost like two-dimensional, but in this case there's still enough there that represents the bulk or the sort of three-dimensional box frame of this building once we get into the detail, the volume of this space.
Well, and that's true. Is I think that's the sort of the tricky part, is that I'm glad you kind of observed that. Is I don't do 1 point perspectives very often. I will do them as diagrams as I'm sort of thinking through layers of space, but I rarely spend a lot of time on them. So, and I'll maybe do multiple 1 point perspective diagrams, trying different elements. But then I'll usually, when I decide to really render a space, that's when I'll switch to more of a 2 point or something, or sort of a different kind of interesting vantage point.
Yeah, well, and the other thing then to the building, or I call it a building, but I mean the construction of it.
Right.
It's lifted. It's this sort of box, open top box, four walls with the space in between that you can walk into the center of it. And then it's lifted a few feet up on the corners, and it's either precast. Is it a precast structure or a cast in place concrete building?
I believe they're all precast elements.
Yeah.
Because at the corners they're sort of tied, and that's what you're seeing. I don't know how that detail particularly works. I'm sort of curious about it now that we're talking about it.
The
But you
buttons,
can sort of see, yeah, you see the buttons there. So my understanding is that there's some precast elements that are set into place, and then some of the column structure ends up touching the ground, but in sort of pinpoints, and you kind of see those in the sketch, and those track around the edge of the building or the space. But there's some real strong cantilevers kind of going on as well to really emphasize the notion of this box being floated. And then there's a small little plinth in the center. So when you walk, so this 1 point perspective, the slot goes all the way through, and then it's intersected at the center of the space with, and these walls are thick too. They're probably a good 2 foot thick panel. So you really kind of feel like you've moved in through a portal, sort of slipped through it. It's because it's not portal like. It feels like you've sort of slipped into the space. It's wide enough that you don't have to like turn your shoulders or anything like that, but it has that presence about it. And so then you kind of enter this empty tomb, and you're confronted by a plinth that is in the center of the space. And so it's, again, this sort of notion of, is this capping something? A cenotaph, by definition, is an empty tomb because somebody is interred, buried somewhere else. Their remains are somewhere else. They're not on the particular site, but it acts as a memorial here. And this is only 2.5 blocks from Dealey Plaza, in the 6th floor building where all the events of that day really transpired. And then the court and the jail is also right there. So the place where Jack Ruby was assassinated was, well, he wasn't assassinated. Oswald was assassinated by Jack Ruby. And I saw something recently where, and I did not know this, or if I did, I had forgotten it, but the cell that Oswald was being kept in the jail that's like right next to all this stuff, when Jack Ruby ended up getting arrested for assassinating Oswald, Ruby was put in Oswald's cell, which just to me is just like layers of crazy on top of, but I think maybe there's
so much mystique that has grown around the whole event in history.
Well, and I think that the only thing I would add too, because I know that we're going to talk about another sketch, is we'd be remiss if we didn't say that Johnson himself is arguably a really important architectural figure, but at the same time, one that has a very, very complicated history of which some people aren't aware of, or as they become aware of it, then want to completely, they just don't even know how to battle with the notion of who this person is. I mean, because he was a Nazi sympathizer, but at the same time was considered probably the father of the star architect kind of concept, and has built works all over the U.S. and really influenced, right or wrong, influenced generations of architects and architecture, at least in the United States. And so I think some of his work is really, really interesting to study. And then some of it is, I think people, even on the architecture criticism side, would say it's pretty terrible. So I throw that in the mix. There's a really good book out right now for kind of talking a little bit more about not just the architecture and the influence of somebody, but the multidimensional aspect of this person's life. And that's by the Dallas's architecture critic, Mark Lamster. He has a book out about Johnson, came out maybe a year and a half ago now, but it doesn't pull any punches. I mean, it definitely talks about all the terrible things that this person was involved in as well. So
yeah, that'd be interesting to read, circle back on. So the one thing before we switch, I actually was wondering, I think we forgot to mention this is Philip Johnson. I don't know if I didn't say the name. So this is a Philip Johnson design. And you and I did a little Google map tour of Dallas before we started recording. And so there's a lot of interesting things in the development of Dallas's downtown areas and a lot of notable buildings. But we panned over to the book depository building, which is a relatively squarish building, which we know, has the 6th floor, right, is where the shots were fired from. But the Cenotaph here kind of has this squarish, almost, I don't know if it's 6 stories tall, but it's pretty tall square cube of a building that is lifted, and then it kind of has this bookend. I mean, I don't want to get too literal, but like the way the form of the perimeter of this thing is like open books. I don't know what Philip Johnson's concepts were in designing it, but at least at minimum, the square design of the Cenotaph has a physical sort of reference to the squarish book depository structure, a cube in a cube in town. So I don't know. That's just something I just was kind of thinking as we were panning around and
looked at it that particular way. But I can say that I am pretty familiar with that location and just sort of walking around it. I mean, it's a strange space. And when you say bookend, regardless of the connection to the depository, I think that's one way to sort of grapple with the tectonics, the form, the shape of this particular memorial. Is it's it's strange to be outside it and then inside it. You get really two very different sensations of where you are in the city. Sound really changes, obviously. It's open to the sky. So sort of your James Sorrell kind of moment.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a difficult, and honestly too, I think that there's a lot of folks who, even people, residents of Dallas, don't even know what this thing is, which is sort of sad. Or if they do, it's just sort of like quietly not spoken about.
Yeah.
But John, and Johnson has other works in town too,
Yeah.
that are maybe not as remarkable or historically important, but then there are other ones that really are really interesting and pretty fantastic structures as well. So, but yeah, this one, especially on that day, is one that I often think about.
What year this was?
It's at 1970.
So okay.
Yeah. And so it was, apparently Johnson was very connected to the Kennedy family. And so I in reading some of his history, and because it was like, oh, well, how did he get selected for this? Because I.M. Pei ended up designing the presidential library, which is in Boston. And I think Johnson might have had something to do with that as well. But because then there's also, I think from what I understand about the library is that Jacqueline Kennedy really liked Pei's work. And so he was also doing the East Wing of the National Museum of Art on the Smithsonian. So there's a couple kind of Pei projects that are sort of tied. And Pei has an important building in Dallas much later, and had done some skyscraper work in Dallas as well, which was oil related. And so I don't know if Johnson had anything to do with those selections or influence, because that was the thing. I think that it's difficult to just completely, I mean, you definitely have to talk about Johnson's complicated history and seedy history, frankly. But at the same time, his influence and connection to a lot of different architects, even in them, from what I understand, even them getting commissions to do other work that he had nothing to do with. So there was a lot of, and I think that's also sort of the king building kind of idea. It's like, oh, I've anointed you as my architect of choice this decade for these types of projects. And on Johnson's estate, there are a series of pavilions of different artists and architects that he anointed for a particular period of time.
That's true. Yeah, he didn't always design them himself. There were certain, but there's a strange, and we can segue to, I mean, a collaborator even. I mean, he and Mies van der Rohe worked together. And let me switch to the other sketch, because it's what we were trying to brainstorm as like a little sort of segue or a tie-in with some of these two sketches. Maybe not physically as far as their design, but is their relationships between the individuals, that Philip Johnson and Mies van der Rohe. And then, having grown up on the East Coast in Connecticut, I used to drive past the glass house on occasion in New Canaan. Yeah, because I grew up not very far, and I actually worked in New Canaan for a little while. And so I would, on my way home, I would just take the long way, well, the non-highway path, take the streets, and I could go through the countryside a little bit and go right past the glass house. And you'd have to stand, there's a stone wall on the road, Ponus Ridge, and then see you got to kind of get out and you got to like peek over the stone wall, because it's not at the street, it's pretty far. It's like 40 acres, I think he has, maybe a little less. And I just kind of look at it, but then you can get glimpses of the other. He treated his property as kind of like this experimental landscape of testing out different styles, different generations, or what's the word? Now, I don't want to say genre, but I guess it's just, I don't even want to say the word style either, but just different approaches and techniques, I guess, in construction, design, other architects' influences, and so on. I mean, he didn't design them all,
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the whole thing, is I think that it's, for those who aren't as familiar with Philip Johnson and might be, looking up him as an individual is, here's a person that lived into their late 90s, and
98, I think.
yeah, 98. I mean, and came from a family of money and wealth. So
Yeah.
it was, but the interest in art and architecture and the influence that he had for 75, 80 years while he was an adult. He staged and curated some of the first modern architecture shows at MoMA, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and like you said, worked with somebody like who we're seeing in this sketch. And
Yep.
so that those collaborations that you're sort of alluding to on his property, he was doing that all throughout his career. And I think that that's the thing, is that it's sort of like, I can almost imagine it jokingly as like Philip Johnston just shows up at your party and like wants to, help you finish that sketch. But
There was a certain sort of Mad Men-esque, if we were to reference the TV show Mad Men, that he made architecture of the recordings that exist of him in conversation and interview and so on, that the sort of, he reflects upon it, and the stories kind of sound a little bit of the era of Mad Men, like the TV show, the sort of New York, the high-paced New York lifestyle with like spending lots of money involved, and sort of this sort of aura around it, right? And
well, I mean, and
yeah.
I did get to meet him once.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. I never actually, I think I saw him. I peeked over the stone wall once, and I could like see
him.
I could see a guy walking between, he had the guest house and the glass house, right? They were like next, and I could see a guy that would appear of age and size and stature of him. That's as far, but that's 1,000 feet away. So where were you? Where'd you wind up meeting?
When I was in graduate school.
Jury.
Sort of. It was more like
Listen
I think
to him talk.
Yeah, it was more like we were invited to hear him and his thoughts. But it was, and clearly at that point, there was, not to go into the complete backstory of why he was on campus, but it was a very interesting moment for College Station, Texas, and Texas A&M to have somebody like Johnson on campus in the architecture college holding hand. And we were actually at a point where we were going through our accreditation process. So there was a lot of materials already collected from multiple levels of the college. And so models, drawings, all that stuff. And so there was an opportunity to display all that in our internal gallery and then sort of curate it. And so he was there and held court for some of the students, some of the faculty, and who were in attendance, and kind of talking about things. And I happened to be in a position where I was able to meet him, my mentor at the time, and had met him multiple times and had some very strong opinions about him that he would share with me in advance of his arrival. But it was nice. I did get to meet him and talk to him on the side a little bit. And yeah, he definitely is. There are certain people that many decades of architecture and influence, it's good or bad, it's very evident in their presence when they can sort of have that recall of different periods, different buildings, different places. And he was really incredibly sharp in that he would have been about, I think he was 90 at the time. So
oh, really?
89 or 90. So
yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, and I sort of brought up the Mad Men thing. I mean, but they were practicing.
I gave him a t-shirt. That I had designed. So I did give him a parting gift. I gave him a t-shirt that I had designed.
Wonder if he ever wore it.
Probably not. He probably burned it, or used it as a dish rag. Not that he would like ever wash a dish, like, let's be honest. But
he had staff for sure.
Yeah, he had staff for that. But he did, I'll just say, he signed one of my sketches, and there's a story behind that I will save for another day. But so one of my little black sketchbooks has a Philip Johnson signature over the top of a drawing that he did not do.
This is the sorts of things that do occur in our education, the sequence of years that we go through, all the stages of life, coming into architecture school, graduate school setting, and then early years working with others, and then just being around juries and things like that. Because we would, back in in LA, we would go to SciArc's juries for final reviews and go to UCLA and Woodbury, because we had these schools of architecture, multiple in the city, that we could kind of see the different philosophies. And then you get random every once in a while somebody like, well, in my case, it would have been like a Tom Main or a Peter Cook, or often would be found in SciArc.
I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And like kind of thinking back again to what your point on like the Kingmaker thing, though, is that Philip Johnson, Mies van der Rohe at the time, as their contemporaries to each other, and kind of elevating to this point in prominence in the mid-century of the country, United States, and developing all these big buildings. I think that sort of sets up a certain air or mystique to the profession, or an added aspect of this profession that isn't, you don't learn that, but if you're around it or exposed to it, there's this sort of lineage to it, right? So then when we were going through school, and I would see, even back then, Tom Main and Wolf and Peter Cook getting in the room together, and there was one time, there was this weird special lecture that USC put together, and it was Wolf, Peter Cook, and Tom Main in the same room, and there was no slides. It was literally just to let them talk, right? They put chairs up on stage. There wasn't even moderation. Like, there was no Q&A, or like they did field questions from students, but there was no plan. They were just happened to be in LA, I guess, at the same time. And Tom Main's on the chalkboard, and they're like sketching with chalk with each other.
And the title of the lecture was Navel Gazing.
They got into these all kinds of very debate. They would debate with each other. It was really interesting, intriguing.
What they needed was Zaha Hadid, who was also their contemporary. They needed her. Yeah, they needed her like at the edge of the table, like just like as they debated with one another. That would have been.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I've ever. I think I saw her speak once at SciArc, I want to say, but I don't know. Have you ever?
I did. I did get to see her speak once, which was fantastic, in Philadelphia. Actually, she keynoted AIA National one year. She was one of the keynotes, and it was the most bizarre setup, and like she was fantastic. I mean, once she got into her kind of more prepared remarks, but I just recall like when she started to talk, it reminds me, like in like today's terms, it would be like when there's technical difficulties on the Zoom and somebody is having difficulty with the Zoom, and like kind of like, is this mic on? Like, can you hear me now? Kind of concept. But she wasn't doing that. She was getting ready. She had been introduced, and she kind of walked up and was getting ready to speak. And there was like ferns like over to the side, and she could hear people talking behind her. None of us in the audience could hear or see them.
Right.
But she kind of made some like offhand remark, like, for the people in the ferns, like, I can still hear you talking, or something like that. And it was just like, let's show some respect to the person who's at the mic. And clearly the keynote, it was like, yes, like, let's show her some respect. I mean, we of course couldn't hear any of that. So it was sort of this weird, like, she kind of pivots and sort of says something off to the side, but it was like, as much as she was saying it for their benefit, she was also saying it for our benefit, you know. Right. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. It's probably, back in the days before, like, where they had the conferences evolved over the years, and now they do this sort of theater in the round. But back then it was more plenum or plenary, what do you call it? Proscenium style.
Yes, exactly.
Stage on the end, and everybody sit sort of facing the stage.
And
they did have a lot of green room-esque. There's a lot of back of house stuff.
Back of house spaces. Yeah. Well, and it was funny was just as you talked about the panel, it made me think is so she spoke in the keynote, and then she was also on sort of a panel with other kind of luminary architects that were in attendance and were speaking in different capacities. I don't remember all the people that were on her panel, other than that Legarreta was on the panel with her, and also Denise Scott Brown.
Oh,
I don't know if Venturi might have been also on the panel, but I'm not sure. But it was very, very evident that Denise Scott Brown and Zaha did not like one another, and but not from a disrespectful kind of way. It was just that they had very, very different points of view
yeah,
about
sure.
architecture and design and theory, and
Yeah.
the two of them were having this fantastic debate. At least this is me kind of in my mind remembering it, and that Legarreta could not keep up. Like he just he was not able to and so it was like, why don't we just let him go get a coffee or something? Let the two of them just keep going. This is great. Like we can do this another hour. Kind of.
It is fun. I think nowadays I feel like they plan out things so much more to sort of prescribe or script it to a degree that you don't get those serendipity moments where the 2 of 4 panelists will just go on a tear on their own tangent and so on, kind of like the thing at USC was not as big as the national conference, but back then I could imagine the personalities. I think that there are a lot of great architects that are practicing right now that are sort of the next generation. I mean, we're kind of going off on this sort of a tangent on the sort of lineage of different, or the family tree of architecture. But it's really interesting to think that there's a lot of really, really good architecture being done now by another generation. But there's not really, I don't know if it's possible to have that same level of sort of personality that the generation with Zaha and Tom Main and Wolf and then go back to Mies and Philip Johnson and probably Gropius and people of that other generation, right? And I don't know what has changed it, right? Is it like the sort of digitization and social media availability? And because I was recently, I don't know what I was watching, in a YouTube video of some other architecture story or something like that, but you only had you either had these interactions like in a live setting, and then you had magazines and books and other ways there was no YouTube, there was no social media, and all the available outlets now that you can kind of curate a presence, right? Or a persona. And so I don't know, there's a lot of good architects now, but there's not that sort of attitude that,
well, I think
makes sense.
It does. I mean, I know where you're coming at from, and I think it's what was unique about that generation, and maybe some generations a little bit before that, were that a lot of them also wrote. They were doing a lot of writing, and also there was a lot of writing about them. And so I think that some of that was trying to distill these kind of concepts into words and sort of dissect them and debate them. And I think that and there was also a level of architecture criticism, both in the public discourse, or at least to some degree in the public discourse. We had some good architecture critics in some of the major metropolitan areas that were trying to talk about bigger ideas. Right or wrong, were they capturing all the ideas that they needed to be talking about societally? I don't think so, but it was interesting. It was, and I think that there's some overlap with what you're referring to. But I'd maybe take the counter argument that there are a lot of architecture firms that I think are shifting the dialogue and the theory, for lack of a better term, and are presenting those things. But I'm just not sure that I think what's maybe different is that it's not that the ideas are any less valid and I don't think that's what you were saying.
No.
Or any less influential. It's, I think that before there was a level of curation that was being done from unseen forces, these sort of systemic forces of sort of curation. So it was easier to digest movements and trajectories and influential individuals. And now the level of curation is that we're able to access so much more information as a profession, that there's more out there, and that the concepts of team and partnerships and different parts of the world that weren't necessarily part of the rote course of architecture history, a very narrow slice of it. I think all of those influences are now much more accessible, maybe not as accessible as they need to be, but they're much more accessible. And I think it's made for almost too much information, probably, for a profession to digest. Like, what I think of when you were sort of talking about sort of the influences was less about the people and more about sort of the movements and concepts and sort of the genealogy of the concepts. And so, like, I think of like Charles Jenks and that history diagram that he has, where he sort of tries to draw the influences and allow people to kind of occupy the different spaces.
Yeah.
I would love for somebody like that to exist today and try and tackle, sort of not necessarily reinterpret what he did, but sort of tackle it in a way that allows for multiple entry points. Because I think that's what you're sort of alluding to, is that there might be, like, if you were going to school today, there might be, depending on who's helping you curate it, different veins of knowledge, because there's so much more to gain access to. I think I just went down my own little rabbit hole there for a moment.
I think that's also, I think you explained some of what I was thinking a little bit better, especially with the Jenks diagram. And then,
Well, and you and I have talked about this a million times, is that it's things like this sketch here, is that or your experience in New Canaan. It's like what that mentor that I was talking about with Philip Johnson, one of the things he would do a lot of architecture criticism and architecture review as a historian and as an architect. And one of the things that he would often say is, I'm not going to give you my review of a particular building until I've been there.
Yeah.
Until I've actually, gotten on the plane and flown to wherever it is to actually go and see it, and walk around it and experience. He goes, I can look at the photos too. I can read the plans. I can hear the interview with the architect or architecture firm, but I want to go and experience it, because somebody is curating that experience for me until I have the experience myself and put my point of view in the discussion. Like, Jamie has entered the chat, then how is it going to influence me? And so, like, for me, studying somebody like Mies, I'd seen some Mies buildings, but I have not been to New Canaan. I do want to go, but I have been to the Farnsworth, which has been recently renamed the Edith Farnsworth House, and no longer referred to as the Mies Glass House, because it wasn't even Mies's house. It was this other person who was the patron of it.
Yeah, the client. None of that matters. It's not zero. It's recording now. Hey, at least we didn't get 45 minutes in and go, oh shit, rookie mistake. All right, ready? We'll try that again. That's pretty good. All right, ready?